evening, everyone, and I'm going to be talking to you this evening about my travel scholarship to Australia, exploring Australian botanic gardens and plants in the wild. First of all, I'd like to say a big thank you to several organisations with the help to funding this trip. Without them, it wouldn't have been possible. This includes the RHS Cope Trust, the Merlin Trust, the Bentham and Moxon Trust here at Kew, and also the Hardy Plant Society. There were also several other people that here in helping organise the trip, and in Australia as well, that I'd like to say a big thank you to. My aims to the trip were to learn about the operations and also operations of each of the botanic gardens. It was also to improve my knowledge of Australian native plants and to meet up with the contacts that I've made prior to the trip. And obviously, finally, most importantly, avoid dangerous animals. This is Australia. So why Australia? Well, it's a place I've always wanted to go to, and this is because of the vast range of different environments that it has, and this includes the different bioregions that it has within it. As you can see here, a vast amount of Australia is actually desert, or where xerophytic plants actually exist, so where plants need less water in order to survive. The areas that we went to was in the southeastern corner here, where there was broadleaf temperate forest. And later in my talk, I shall be talking briefly about a tropical rainforest that I also went to. On the 19th of August this summer, myself and my partner who travelled with me, we went on a 2-week travel scholarship to Australia and travelled to the New South Wales and Victoria states, which are in the southeastern corner of Australia. And if you look on the right here, this is zoomed in, you can see that Sydney is on the coast here of New South Wales and Melbourne on the southern coast in Victoria state. Along our journey to get to Australia, we stopped over in Singapore to refuel. And little did we know that there was a really nice surprise there, in that there's several gardens available for people to go around whilst you're waiting to catch your connecting flight. 2 of the gardens that we had a chance to go to was the arid garden to begin with. And this included lots of agaves, lots of plumerias of different species and cultivars. It also had a selection of polypods and pachypodiums and aloes there in the far left corner. This is to name but a few plants that were there. We then went on to the water lily garden, which, yes, you guessed it, it did have lots of water lilies in it, and also lots of nelumbo, dwarf pandanus, and also a garden wall, which had ferns and peperomias on it as well. After this, we later discovered that there was even more to go and explore within the airport itself, including an orchid garden and also a tropical garden with a swimming pool. So you need not look further than Singapore Airport. Once we arrived in Australia, one of the first things we did, we travelled from Sydney down to Mount Annan, which is a satellite garden of Sydney Botanic Gardens. There is another botanic garden, which is another satellite to Sydney itself, which I shall be talking about later, which is called Mount Tomar, which is in the Blue Mountain National Park. Mount Annan was opened in 1988 and is a very popular tourist attraction for people from Sydney, as it's very close to get to, but also it's because you can also drive around the site like a safari park, which allows people of all access to all areas for everyone. There's also a mountain bike trail within this woodland here, which is an endangered type of woodland called the Cumberland Plain Woodland. On this map here, you can see, even in 2013, that there's a threat of encroaching within the park, or upon the park rather, which is urban encroachment from the west here and also in the southeast. Just to put it into perspective, Sydney is just up to our top right there. Mount Annan is a well-landscaped garden, and it's home to more than 2,000 native flora of Australia. It's got lots of Cyathea ferns, cycads, conifers, and banksias, to name but a few there. Some flowers of interest and also cones of interest was the kangaroo paw in the top left-hand corner there. There's lots of different species and colours of this particular flower. And also there was a lot of acacias, or what's known locally as wattle trees. There's actually more than 1,000 species of acacia, and I was amazed to see how different they each were. Another couple of items of interest within the garden that I would like to share with you now is the fact that you could actually see staghorn ferns outside, which was a reminder that you were in Australia. This one here in the foreground is Superbum, Passacerum superbum, and in the background you can just catch a glimpse of another type of Passacerum, the bifurcata, which was growing quite happily on a concrete wall and taking over it. On the right-hand side here, you can see a grass tree in bloom, which is fantastic because I never have seen this before in Xanthorias, so that was a great opportunity to see. Here I've put in this slide of Banksia grandis, as it was a fantastic specimen, and also you can just make out two small orange blobs in that picture, which are the flowers that are still carrying on. On the left there you can see that these are the cones, which are slightly larger than the flowers themselves. These require a bushfire in order for them to release the seeds. This Banksia grandis is actually a very important pollinator attractant for many vertebrates and invertebrates, so mammals and also birds. I should also point out that this was a graft, but unfortunately it didn't say on the sign next to it what it was grafted onto, but I thought that was particularly interesting. Mount Annan holds the National Seed Bank for Australia, so anything that's collected across Australia is sent here. On the left-hand side here, there's offices, and on the right-hand side is where the interpretation is for tourists to go in, and they can discover for themselves, or they can have a tour as well. They've also got a special lab just on the far right here for schools to go into and have lessons there as well. And downstairs, just like the Millennium Seed Bank, is where all the seeds are stored in the freezers. In 2003, there was a partnership that struck up between the Millennium Seed Bank and Mount Annan, and since then they've been working on various different projects together. So here is just to show a couple of the interpretations that were available for people to go and discover. And they were in lots of different drawers, so it was quite exciting for schools and also for anyone to just go and learn a little bit if they wanted to find out about native flora of Australia, seeds or fruits or even flowers. In the top right there is just showing a window onto one of the labs that they had, which currently shows some waratah being grown in agar jelly, and this was a particular project that they were working on to repopulate populations in the wild for this particular species. The next day we travelled out west from Sydney into the Blue Mountains to Mount Tomar Botanical Gardens. This was about a 2-hour journey out to the Botanic Gardens, and it's about 1,000 metres above sea level. And it has a fantastic view across the Blue Mountains, as you can see in the background there. It was actually a cut flower farm in the early 1900s and run by a French couple for 50 years and ran very successfully as well. There was actually kilometres of cherry laurels on the site to help protect the flowers. A lot of this is now gone, but what does remain are the originals or cuttings from the originals. You can see here in the foreground basalt rock, which is very popular in the area as it is in the ground there, and is used a lot for stone walls. The soil here is actually quite rich. It's a volcanic clay, which in itself is very interesting because this garden here is a rock garden of cool climate plants from the southern hemisphere. And because of that, there's lots of Australian and South African plants here, but they're actually growing very well. which is interesting in itself because they don't actually require rich soils, and yet they're doing very well. When we went there, it was like stepping back in time, because we knew that we were going back to winter stroke spring, but nothing really prepares you for having that shock. So when we saw that there was no leaves on the trees, it really hit home that we were stepping back into a different season again. But it was a lovely season to step back into, with narcissus bulbs out everywhere, irises, and a few shrubs that were out of bloom at the time, including the rhododendrons and camellias. I should point out in this garden there's a fantastic specimen of Xanthoria, which is 700 years old, and I think it was the oldest one that we encountered on our trip. Just across the top here is a couple of flowers that were in bloom at the time of our visit. At the top left there's Banksia spinulosa, and on the top right, Isopogon petiolaris. Some of you may recognise this as the king protea. It's Protea cineroides, and in the bottom right here is another type of protea which has really interesting feathery petals on it, both of which are from South Africa. Later in the week, we went to the Botanic Gardens of Sydney, the Royal Botanic Gardens of Sydney, I should say. And if you imagine, to get an idea of the location, the Botanic Gardens are situated in the inner harbour, with the Pacific Ocean out to the right-hand side here, or east. And also, if you know of the Sydney Opera House, it's situated right next to the Royal Botanic Gardens on a little peninsula there. This year is a particularly special year for the garden. It's 200th birthdays this year, so it's slightly younger than Kew. But a lot of exciting things are happening there. Like this developing border that they have here, which includes a 200-year-old Xanthoria to help celebrate the birthday of the garden, with lots of younger ones around it. And then off to the right here you can see what's called bottle trees, which are native to Australia, or what otherwise known as Brachychiton rupestris. Another thing that's new and exciting in the garden is the Calyx building, which is an exhibition centre and currently housing the chocolate exhibition, which was interesting in itself and really helped build an appetite for lunch. It was interesting to see how they'd used the wall for a wall garden, using different coloured flowers to represent different chocolates, and also here they've got flowers representing the chocolate god of South America. We were lucky enough to meet the curator of the garden, Dale Dixon, and also the director, Jimmy Turner, at the time of our visit. And one of the things that Dale's been doing since he arrived is using a lot more epiphytes in the garden, whereas before they were quite limited. And here I just wanted to show you this fantastic specimen here of the Dendrobium terretifolium, the pencil orchid, which is a native orchid to Australia and is in all its glory in the garden at the moment. Another thing I wanted to show you is some of the ficus trees were amazing here with their buttress roots, and this one in particular, which was the Ficus macrophylla. There was actually a possum hiding in the tree just around the corner, which is very popular occurrence in Australia. A lot of trees there actually have plastic sheets around the girth of the tree there, and this protects them against possums actually climbing up the tree, because they eat out the tips and new shoots of trees, so it looks like a squirrel's got to it, but in this case it's a possum. It really hit home that you're in Australia when you've got bromeliads outside used as carpet bedding. This is because the temperature doesn't really drop below 5 degrees in winter, and in most of the summer it's sort of mid-30s up to 40 degrees for a few days of the year. They also use a lot of clivia, which you can find in the palm house and the POW here as well. That concludes the end of our first week in Sydney. We then flew down to Melbourne for 1 week, and the gardens of Melbourne are situated just south of the River Yarra and also the city centre of Melbourne, so almost in the heart of the city. It's only 170 years old, I say only, it's 170 years old, and it's the place where our current Director of Horticulture, Richard Barley, actually worked before coming here. It's also now where the Director, Chris Cole, is working, and he actually did the Q diploma before going out there, before he had other jobs as well. But he's actually British. And here you can just make out one of the plastic sheets that's around one of the palms there. But it gives you an idea that it's a real problem there with possums. Now I'd like to show you part of the arid garden. And again, it was a lovely surprise to see that most of the collection is outside, and a realisation that you're in Australia to be able to do this. And they only rarely have freakish weather where you have actual hailstorms, which unfortunately once they had one in the afternoon when everyone had already gone home, and the hail just sat around the bases of quite a lot of cacti, and so they rotted off. But we've also been unfortunate to have a vandal in recent years who came in and just axed quite a lot of the collection, and it was just ruined. But on the plus side, they've had a lot of good donation from one particular nursery on the border of New South Wales and Victoria States. And Brett here, who helped look after the collection, was there to receive it. And it's from the Blossfeld family. You may have heard of them, as Robert Blossfeld got in touch with the gardens to say that they had such a large collection now and they were becoming unable to look after it all for security reasons. And so Melbourne was more than happy to take some of this on. And as far as you can see here, a small collection of cacti here, and there was even more behind where I was standing just here. So it was an amazing amount that was donated. It was all from originally when Robert's father, Harry Blossfeld, went out to South America in 1935 to collect most of the original plants in this collection here. And if you want to find out more, there is a video on YouTube about the Blossfeld nursery. In 2004, Melbourne opens their children's garden, access to all areas within it. There's no keep-off signs anywhere. It's for children to go and explore, and because it's right next to the city centre, like Kew, it's an area where children need this space to be able to go and explore and enjoy themselves. It was thanks to the Ian Potter Foundation that this was able to happen. And schools actually book it out so that they can use a certain area within it, or all of it, for the day, and have lessons outdoors to be able to use the pond area and much more. I'm now going to talk to you about the irrigation system that they have at Melbourne. You may be wondering why I've got this picture of the arid garden, or a section of the arid garden behind me. That's because just up here is Goldwall's volcano, and what it is a construction where they've used a upturned cone to create a reservoir. And this was originally done back in 1879, just around the time that they redirected the Yarra River in order to create the swamp area which makes up the lake system as it stands today, and that was back in 1899. This photograph on the right here shows the actual it's a mending just mending it, and because it had sat for 60 years doing nothing, so they needed to restore it. On the top here, you can see it full again here, and what it does is it collects the rainwater and storm water just off the streets to the right here, and with these pontoon systems, they've got platforms of floating different vegetation in order to help filter the plants, filter the water. And then this flows down the slope within the gardens, underneath the canna beds, and then flows down into the fern gully here, still filtering the water, and then finally into these lakes here, which has got, again, more pontoons on top of it of floating vegetation. They don't really have a problem with Legionellas in Australia, but they do have a problem with blue-green algae, hence all this filtering. It's also because of the Yarra River being so saline as it's right on the coast there. in recent years they have had a problem with drought on and off for the last 13 years, and it's evident throughout the city that this is still to be reminded to people. And with this lake system, it helps keep the reservoirs topped up, especially in years like this year where you have the La Nina rather than El Nino cycle, which means that there is a lot of rain. During the time at Melbourne, we were lucky enough to have a tour of the herbarium and also the seed bank labs. Here you can see that what is collected is split into half, and what is collected out in the field is half sent to Mount Anna, and the other half is sent to Kew, the Millennium Seed Bank. In years like this year, they haven't been able to collect what they needed for their 20 species, which the government require them to collect. So what they do is they collect what they can, and they come up with a process called orcharding, whereby they split what they've collected in half, germinate it, and then pot it on. And then once it's flowered, they then collect what they've got, take the molecular data, and then keep going until they've got enough to bank. And on the left there, you can see that they've got a good collection there that's ready now to be split into Kew and Mount Anna. One of the satellite gardens to Melbourne is Cranbourne, which is situated 45 kilometres southeast of Melbourne, and it's a very different garden to any of the others that we went to. This is because it's quite young. It's opened in 2006 and is a contemporary garden whereby they've got a large area which is representing the desert in Australia. And if you remember back to the map that I showed you at the start, this takes up a large area of Australia. The outside areas are then covered in native flora around it, representing different bioregions in themselves, but all native flora of Australia, just like that. This design here shows how complex it is, with different themes in different areas of the garden. And an aerial view shows here how large the desert area is represented with all the different bioregions around it. So looking at one of the interpretation boards here, the water saving garden looked at different Mediterranean plants and had lots of different suggestions so that they could cut down on their watering for the garden with such changing climates. They also had areas within the garden that was for scientific research, looking at how plants react differently in the changing climate that they have. A couple of plants of interest in the garden that I'm going to show you now is the tilapia, locally known as waratah. And this particular one, Speciosima, is an iconic species to New South Wales, not to Victoria. But it's growing very well here, although within the state itself, they're not growing very well now due to the dry conditions that they're experiencing. This one on the right here is a Corumbia lisifolia, and it's because of its column-shaped flowers that make it so beautiful with the colour, and it's just a beautiful shrub. I was amazed to see how diverse the flowers were for eucalyptus, and also the different types of fruits that they have as well. And on the right here is just giving an example of a cultivar of camellia. I didn't really know much about camellias or melaleucas or even hakeas before I went out, so it was amazing to see them out in flower and so diverse as well. I'm now going to talk to you about the national parks that we went to, and looking firstly at the Blue Mountains National Park with the Three Sisters, which is an iconic tourist attraction, but also represents the large vastness of the eucalyptus forest here, which is a temperate forest. And just up here you can see the blue hue above the rainforest, which is the oils that are given off by the eucalyptus trees, and it's a fantastic smell. Just round the corner is Wentworth Falls, and this is very important for its hanging swamps with its constant drip of water through the different vegetation, which is really important for different native flora here, including some of the native orchids, ferns, mosses, sedges, and even fungi, which we saw bright orange ones as well there. It was very, very interesting. To compare this now with the Yarra Ranges National Park, just east of Melbourne, and in the foothills to the alpine areas that they have in Australia, just up to the northeast here, and then on into another state where there's Mount Kosciuszko National Park, which also has a lot of alpine flora. But where we went, there was a lot of eucalyptus species, different again from where we went in the national park, Blue Mountains National Park, but had fantastic specimens of huge mountain ash and a lot of cyathea ferns there, including a lot of epiphytic orchids as well. Here they receive a lot of rainfall, but not as much as further in, and they don't receive snow at this point either. I'm now going to make a third comparison. This wasn't part of the travel scholarship, but it was a part of the trip in itself. And we went to Cairns, and just above Cairns is the Daintree rainforest. And from this map, you can see how close it is to Papua New Guinea. You may have heard of the Daintree rainforest before, maybe from the forest itself, or from the tea that you can get from there, which is delicious. Or perhaps you might have heard of their sugar plantations there. So remembering that it's a tropical rainforest, here they actually receive up to 2,000 millimetres of rain, whereas in the other two temperate rainforests that I used, there was 800 to 1,000 millimetres of rain in there. Here obviously they've got a much more tropical climate and also a higher temperature relative humidity, with lots of mangrove rainforests, and also you can see here where there's a strangling fig, but there's no actual tree there anymore, it's gone. But this is the view up inside it, but it's still very much alive. Also in the area, there was lots of pandanus rainforest, which was very hard to navigate unless you had a broad wall throughout, which is probably safer as well with snakes. On the right here as well, you can just get an idea to the height of the palms in there, and also the height of the eucalyptus trees, reminding yourself again that you're in the tropics now. I'm personally really into birds and also bats, so I've just brought these up to show you of personal interest. And these are the Australian pelicans, which are up in Kent as well. And also on the right here you have the speckled flying fox, which was protected within Kent itself, as there are lots of areas which are now threatened by urban encroachments. Now, remembering what I put in my aims, on the left here we have a male crocodile which was 4.5 metres long, and it was along the banks of one of the rivers of the mangrove rainforest, the Daintree rainforest, and one of the youngsters here on a tiny log that was there, but still looking very human and not too attached. Finally, just my last slide, just to give you an idea of the Cairns Botanic Gardens, the size of the bamboo there. I hope you've enjoyed this talk. Thank you very much for listening.